husband asked my son to pay for rent. He didn't know that the kid owns the house. I 40F have been married to my now husband Joe for 15 years. I have a son, Matt 22M, from my previous relationship with Jake. Right after I graduated high school, I moved into Jake's house. He passed away 3 years later from cancer. 2 years after that, I met Joe and we got married a year later. Joe moved into my house, which was owned by my deceased husband. When my son turned 18, Joe apparently told Matt that he had to pay $500 a month for rent and utilities. Matt told him that he actually owned the house we live in, and because he wanted to be vindictive, said Joe could pay $1,000 a month to him or get out. My husband didn't believe him, but I confirmed that this was Matt's house and we couldn't force him to do anything. Rent didn't matter to Matt because his dad left him a fortune to cover expenses for the rest of his life. I really wish Joe had talked to me about this before saying anything because we have 3 other sons. I'm a middle school teacher and my husband works in a factory, so our combined income is only $75,000. Here, everyone has their own room with a huge backyard and pool. We could never afford to own or rent a place like this otherwise. My husband was shocked and tried to apologize, but my son didn't accept it and insisted he had to pay or leave. The most we could afford was a 2-bedroom apartment in a bad neighborhood. I told Joe that uprooting our kids from a good school district and their friends because of his mistake wasn't an option. A month passed and my husband hadn't paid his rent. When my son asked for it, my husband laughed and said he wasn't paying. My son gave him an eviction notice. My husband suggested we go to his parents' house, but I refused and said either he pays or he goes by himself. He paid and has continued to pay since then. However, my husband refuses to talk to Matt. Other than that, everything in the house is perfect. My ex also left my son a lake house in Florida. My son graduated college and wanted to take all of us on vacation to celebrate before he starts law school. My husband was excited, but my son quoted him $800. He explained that a grown man shouldn't be taking a handout. Joe stormed off. This morning, the 5 of us plus Matt's girlfriend were headed out the door. Joe yelled at me and couldn't believe I was going. I told him I'm not going to let me and the kids suffer for a mistake he made trying to be macho. I left and my husband sent me a text message saying he was disappointed in me for siding with my son instead of him and for turning the kids against him. Am I the a-hole here? Edit. I did leave a few things out after reading the replies. I thought to add some things. I technically never married my ex. He was 50 when we had our son, so he had a really good job and a few properties. I never told Joe that I didn't own the house because he would have never agreed to staying in a house that my ex owned. So I handled all finances. Joe would just pay me his portion of utilities and bills. A lot you guys are saying that I didn't handle the situation, but I believe I handled it to the best of my ability. When the situation first happened, I told Joe I really love him and would love to remain a family with a decent quality of life. But if he couldn't remain in this household, I would agree to divorce him. He begged me to not divorce and said that he'll just pay my son the money. I thought that was the best way to handle the situation. Also, our finances are separate, so it's not taken away from me or the kids, but Joe doesn't really have money for his hobbies and interests, which was a problem for a while until he learned to just get over it. Update 1. So I took your advice to try to solve this situation. I asked Matt why Joe paying rent is necessary. Matt told me it isn't and that he hasn't touched the money Joe gave him. It's in a bank account. I asked him why he was doing this then. Matt told me Joe has never apologized for demanding rent money to begin with. I was confused and said Joe told me he apologized. Matt explained he never got an apology and when he does, Joe can stop paying rent and get the money back. I called Joe and asked why he's never apologized to Matt, and he was honest with his answer and said because Matt disrespected him in his house and he should be the man of the house and have authority, but was embarrassed when he found out about the house because he realized that Matt was actually in control of him. I asked what was his full intentions when he asked Matt to pay rent. Joe said it was to help lessen the bills. Joe only makes $2,500 a month and $500 went bills. Another $500 went to the kids and another $250 on groceries. He also helps his parents out. He had nothing at the end of the month for his personal expenses, and this $1,000 a month definitely did not help. He thought about apologizing, but he said his ego wouldn't let him. Joe said he loves Matt, but doesn't think he could ever forgive him. I told him he started this mess, and honestly, if he thought I owned the house, it wasn't his place to charge my son rent. He just hung up the phone. So that's where we stand. I don't know what to do now. Update 2. When we got home, Joe's parents were there. Me, Matt, Joe, and his parents had a talk. They asked me how I let Matt treat him this way and that a wife should back her husband up. Before I could talk, Matt said that a man who marries a mother should treat her kids like his own, but he hasn't been doing that for the past 15 years. I asked Matt, what is he talking about? He said every time I went to one of my teacher conferences or went on vacation, Joe would leave him at home by himself and take the other boys out to do something fun. He always disguised it as it was kid stuff and I wouldn't like it, but tell you I didn't want to go. At 18, he actually planned on moving out, but COVID happened, so he just decided to stay. I asked Joe if it was true, and he looked at me and said, yay, he shouldn't have to take care of someone else's kid. His parents looked disgusted, and his dad just went off on him and said he didn't raise him like this. I yelled at him and told him to get the out. He pleaded that he was sorry and that he realized that he was wrong with how he felt. His dad told him to leave, and when my husband tried to get in their car to go home with them, they said absolutely not and that he was on his own. He tried going to his brother's house, but when he heard the full story, he said no because he has kids and will be upset if their stepmom treated them horribly. From what I heard, he's staying with a friend. I had divorce papers given to him at his job. He texted me and asked if we could meet. We met at a cafe, and he said he was really sorry and has been for a long time, and that he never meant to hurt me or Matt, but that he said it was hard to love another man's child. I just left. He's filed the papers, so I guess our divorce is about to start. I apologized to Matt for being a bad mom. He's fine, and our oldest son heard the conversation and doesn't want anything to do with his dad. The youngest still spends time with him.